Hey everybody, it's Eric from epautos.com, your libertarian car guy. This is being done, I guess, about 24 hours after Trump's turnabout on what he calls the Democrat hoax, or rather what he was calling the Democrat hoax, i.e. the Epstein files, which aren't files per se, though I guess there are files involved. When people use that term, what they're referring to is just the concatenation of information that the government apparently has with regard to Jeffrey Epstein and his operation and who may have been involved with that. Anyhow, everybody now knows that Trump has decided it isn't a hoax, or rather it's time to release the files after a couple of months of doing everything he conceivably could do to change the subject and prevent the files from being released. Obviously, he's had to do this because of the political fallout that is metastasizing about his going back on a key campaign pledge that he made back in 2024. Just a bit too much. And his attack also, not just on Tom Massey, but also on Marjorie Taylor Greene, the latter being just impossible for any except the most die-hard cultists of the red hat to swallow, because, you can say Massey was an impediment to Trump's agenda because Massey is more of, I guess, a libertarian than he is a MAGA guy. But, there's a lot of alignment there regardless. The point is, you can make a not incoherent argument that Massey stood in the way of Trump's agenda, and that's why Trump wants to have him primaried. On the other hand, it's impossible to make that argument against Marjorie Taylor Greene. And, Trump's lunatic posts that she's a leftist and a traitor and all this stuff, it's not gone over well. So he's had to go back and now say that he's in favor of releasing the files. And this begs the question of, what are we going to end up seeing? Well, I don't know that we're going to end up seeing anything. In the first place, even though Trump could, by executive order, have everything that the government has made public, revealed to the people, which he's not going to do, I don't think, there still has to be a vote, doesn't there? And it's by no means certain that that vote is going to go in the direction that will result in that information being released. Now, if it is released, I think what we're going to end up seeing is something along the lines of what we saw when all of the Kennedy stuff was released. Remember that? Everybody was on their seats with excitement, thinking that at last, 60 years after JFK was blown away, the public might actually get to find out what actually happened that day in Dealey Plaza all those many decades ago. Instead, what they got for the most part was a bunch of redacted pages. Redacted meaning blacked out. So, you'd get a piece of paper that had maybe a couple of words and maybe even a half of a sentence that you could read, and the rest of it had been blacked out so that you couldn't read anything. They'll cite national security, even though it's 60 years ago now, and pretty much everybody who was involved with that is dead, and has been dead for quite some time. So I think that's what's going to happen with regard to whatever information the government has pertaining to Epstein's operation, because I don't think Trump, even under intense political pressure, would have agreed to that information being disclosed if he felt that there was something in that information that would be catastrophic to him politically. I think maybe he's feeling confident they've managed to black it all out or lose the relevant portions. Now, I know some are going to say that, I'm being unfair to the president, and maybe I am. I will admit that maybe I am, but his actions, his conduct strongly suggests to me otherwise. And I don't mean just the way that he has reversed position on the whole thing and disparaged people who wanted to know after promising that he was going to be the guy who was going to let us all know. I'm talking about the totality of Trump's behavior over the past couple of decades. The fact that he was friends with Epstein. It's very clear he was tight with the guy. Anybody who says otherwise is just delusional or lying. We've got impossible to deny evidence of that in the form of videos, in the form of photos of him, not just in the same room at some party where rich, famous people were, but standing next to him with his arm around him, joking with him, leering at women. Okay, now I know a lot of men do that, and that's not necessarily a criminal thing. Let's put it that way. Hell, I've done it. Every man has done it. But on top of that, you've got him on TV talking about how his then teenage daughter was hot. Now, I don't know any man who would say that their teenage daughter is hot and start talking about how what they have in common is sex, which is another comment that he made, and about her body and how she looks and how she's a piece of ass, which is something else that he said. That's pretty creepy. And then what else have we got? Well, we've got a number of other things. We've got his statements on the Howard Stern show about inspecting women, girls, underage girls, teens, when he was the owner of the Miss Teen USA beauty pageant. I think that was back in the 90s. And he and Stern were joking about how, because he owned the pageant, you know, he could just march right back into the dressing room where these underage girls were naked, half naked, and examine the merchandise. You should listen to his comments if you think that I'm being a bit over the top about that. You know, it's very clear that he was interested in looking at naked and half naked teenage girls. And again, I can kind of understand, you know, the sort of lust part of it in your head, but the fact that he went that extra step farther and went to actually violate their privacy, and to do that in a position where he was sort of the guy in charge and they were at his mercy, that's pretty sketchy. You know, just overall, the man's actions, the things that we know about for sure that aren't debatable on this particular topic, make the idea that there might be something to this Epstein stuff not entirely batty, you know? You know, if these things were being said about Ron Paul, who has got absolutely no record that I'm aware of anything sketchy in his personal life, you'd be you just dismiss it out of hand for the obvious reason that it just it's not congruent. It doesn't tie in. But when it comes to Trump, it kind of does, doesn't it? And if it's true, it's devastating. And you know, some people will say, well, if it's true, how come the Democrats didn't use that? Well, I think because of something called mutual assured destruction. I think that there are as many people on the Democrat side of the aisle as there are on the Republican side of the aisle who perhaps have been involved with this sordid, awful stuff. And, you know, they didn't want to blow themselves up along with the other side, so they were sort of a gentleman's agreement to not bring it up. Trump painted himself in a corner, though, because, you know, when the stuff started coming up about Epstein, and I think it goes back to, you know, the Rush Limbaugh era, people were talking about that on the conservative side. Well, Trump picked that up and ran with it and said, you know, vote for me, elect me, and I will release it. He may have thought he'd never have to do that. He may have thought it was just another campaign BS promise he could make that people would forget about it, but they haven't forgotten about it. And the fact that he promised makes it very difficult for them to accept him just sort of pretending like there was nothing going on there. So I think he's in real trouble now. I don't know how he's going to extricate himself from this, because, you know, if they bring forth redacted pages, that's not going to fly. And Massey and Green and other people are going to continue to just hammer at this until we get to the bottom of it. And I think what we're going to find at the bottom of it is something that we're not going to like. I'm persuaded. I don't say that I know it. I don't say that I can prove it. But my gut as a journalist, I've been a journalist for more than 30 years. You know, I kind of feel like I've got a pretty good sense for this sort of thing, is that this indeed was a honeypot operation, and it was conducted by a foreign power. I think we all know probably which foreign power, to entrap and lure people who have no self-control and have you know, demented and perverted interests, and get them into a compromising situation. You know, something that's not just embarrassing, but potentially criminal. You know, we're not talking about a guy who cheats on his wife. We're way past that point. Nobody would care. I certainly wouldn't care. You know, it comes out that Trump cheated on his wife with a grown woman, even if she's, you know, 23. Whatever, you know, that's between him and his wife. But if we're talking about, you know, 16 and 17-year-old girls, that's a whole nother thing. And I do think that that's what we're talking about. And I think that that the government, I'm not going to use R, ooh, I slipped there, the government is absolutely riddled with these people. And I think that they will do absolutely anything they have to do to prevent the truth about that from coming out. Anyway, that's my take on it. I'm sure we'll have more to talk about within the next 24 hours. More over at epautos.com, the web's best libertarian gearhead site. Thanks as always for listening, and we'll catch up with you again soon.